welcome everybody. I'm super excited to have this panel together. Let me go ahead and introduce the panelists and then we'll just jump into the questions if that's okay with everybody. So for those of you that have walked around in the math department some, you might recognize two of the faces that are on the screen because they have videos that rotate on the math department TV upstairs. So one of those is Kate Causey. Kate Causey is a 2017 mathematics graduate with a minor in medicine, health, and culture. And she's working for the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle. So those of you that kind of watched the news during the beginning COVID outbreak, you might have noticed that the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation did a lot of those models, right? For trying to study the outbreak in the pandemic. So I hope Kate talks a little bit about that tonight. We'll see. Next on my screen is Rahul Isaac. He is a 2015 mathematics and the precursor to the applied math major, which was called the computer science and mathematics major. He was a double major in both of those two things. I think he has a master's degree in operations research from North Carolina State. And he's working on a second master's degree right now in computer science. He used to work for Home Depot, but now he's doing something different. So I'm hoping he will talk to us a little bit about that as well tonight. Finally, on the screen, we have Patrick MacDonald. He is a 2019 graduate in business and accounting and Chinese, double major, and has a master's from Wake Forest in business analytics. And now he's working for E&J Gallo out in San Jose, California. So if you guys would, although you might not be able to hear it distinctly, would thus welcome our panelists with a round of applause. All right, so when Connor joins in, I understand Connor is actually in England right now, so the time difference might be some sort of delay there, but when he joins in, I'll make sure I introduce him as well. All right, so we'll just start. My first question for the panel is, can you talk to the students in the room and online? What is your current job role, and what makes you excited about your job? And I think I'll just go in the alphabetical order we started with. So we'll start with Kate, and then we'll go to Rahul and Patrick. So Kate, you're up first.
Sure, thanks, Dr. Hutson. As he mentioned, I work at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, and it's a research institute that is affiliated with the University of Washington in Seattle. My title is researcher. Last summer, I completed a 3-year post-bachelor fellowship, and so for a little over a year now, I've been in the role of researcher since getting my master's in public health through that program. In that role, I do a lot of analysis. I do a lot of working across teams and across different partner organizations and entities. And some of the things that excite me about my job are really interesting questions about people's health and life and well-being, whether that be trying to understand the COVID-19 pandemic and what we think might happen in the future. Or looking at, right now I'm working on a project looking at family planning and contraception use around the world and what have been kind of the biggest drivers of those changes and what have led to increases in those changes around the world. So I really am excited by those questions. And then I'm also motivated and excited by really interesting, unique, different methods I get to try out and test to see if we can find some answers or some ideas that help support some of those questions that are being asked.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. So Rahul, you're up next. Tell us about what is your current job role and what makes you excited about your job?
So since that title was written probably, I've left Home Depot and I'm now working at a company called Revenue Analytics. Very imaginative title. Basically, we analyze revenue. That's really what it is. My job title is now as a software engineer. We sort of see that a lot in any sort of data space where you might have very different job titles that have not that different job responsibilities. So what I do love about my job is that I get to solve interesting problems every day. They're not always earth-shattering problems. A lot of times it's just like a little bug in the code. It just if you enjoy just working with data, finding insights from data, and if you enjoy problem solving, creative problem solving, it's kind of perfect.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Rahul. Okay, so Patrick, you're up next. What's your current job role, and what makes you excited about that job?
Yeah, thank you. My current role, I'm a data analyst at E&J Gallo Winery. For those who don't know what E&J Gallo Winery is, it's a winery, yes, but it's a conglomerate of a lot of different alcohol companies. We are a supplier, so just some companies are Barefoot Wine, New Amsterdam Vodka, High Noon Hard Seltzers, and like Dark Horse Wine. There's many more, but those are probably our most popular. So within my role, I am a sales data analyst. So I get a lot of sales data. I'm analyzing it all day, every day. It's a lot of fun. And what makes me really excited about this role is my team is brand new. So like I was the first analyst hire on the team. It's me and my boss on the team, and we're about a year old now. And then 6 months into the department, I guess, the sales analytics department, we brought on 6 more data scientists to help analyze the different data, because we're sitting on a mountain of data. But as we'll get in later, the data is not the cleanest data in the world. However, there is a lot of tailwind behind our department, and it's a lot of fun. It's like a startup sort of environment, and it's really, really quick. However, it's a lot of fun to be working with alcohol data. Yeah, nonetheless.
I could see the students' ears perk up as we started talking about alcohol. Yeah. All right, so last on the screen there is Connor Southall. Let me introduce you, Connor, and I'll prep you for the first question. So Connor is a 2020 Math, Econ, and Applied Math graduate from Furman. And I believe, Connor, is it true that you went to work with Tresata right out of your undergraduate degree? And then you might be stationed currently over in England. Is that true?
Yeah.
So
my light is a little bit more artificial on my face because the sun has been setting the sun set about 5 hours ago. So.
Yeah. Nice. Well, good. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. So the question that I posed to the panelists before was, what is your current job role with Tresata? And then what makes you excited about that job?
Yeah, so currently my position at Tresata is as a data engineer. And in my role, I think the most exciting part about my job is that I've only been here for a little over a year out of my undergraduate from Furman. But I feel like I have a lot of agency over a lot of the technical aspects of the project that I've been assigned. While it's not as flashy as, alcohol data, that sounds super cool. I feel like there's a lot amount of change that I can make in the world, relative to my role as one of 7 billion people on this earth. I work most intimately with anti-financial crime incentives. And so I am a major component in developing applications and software that, help some of the largest financial institutions detect fraud and money laundering. And I think that is the most exciting part is knowing that, some of my contributions go directly towards bettering the whole world that we live in on a global scale.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Connor. All right. So I forgot to mention before we get started, if you have questions, if you're online, if you have questions, you can certainly post those in the chat. Both Liz and Kristen are monitoring the chat for those questions, and they're going to alert me of those. If you're in the room and you have questions, you're certainly welcome to raise your hand, and we'll get those questions asked. But in absence of that, I'm going to move on to my next question, which are, what are the skills that you use most often in your job role? And then if you would, think about the following follow-up to that, which is, what skills did you develop at Furman that are useful in your job role versus what skills do you wish you had developed at Furman that might be useful in that current job role? So if you can kind of talk to those 3 types of questions, I appreciate that. And again, I think we'll start with Kate.
Sure. I think the things that come to mind are, one of the things I feel like I learned most from my math degree at Furman is and the ability to be an independent problem solver and thinker, and really think carefully and deeply about a problem that I'm handed and kind of work at it and figure out what a solution to that problem might look like. Try, fail, try again, those sorts of things. Another thing that I think I learned at Furman is being able to, maybe I began to learn this at Furman, but it's definitely, I've continued to grow and develop into this skill in my current role. But to be able to summarize and synthesize information and communicate it clearly, concisely, and efficiently. I think a lot of my work is taking a lot of dense, complicated information, a data set with, hundreds of thousands of rows or even millions of rows sometimes, depending on what kind of project you're working on, and being able to communicate that clearly and effectively to answer, certain questions, or even to ask the right questions to figure out where we need to go moving forward. So I think those are probably the two that come to mind that I really feel like I started developing at Furman. A third skill that I wish I had more experience with and use often is scientific writing, and being able to really write for an academic and scientific audience. I think I had a lot of experience writing in my social science classes at Furman, but not as often in my more technical math classes and other technical classes. So that's something that I wish I had developed earlier, and starting to think about how you write for academic journals or kind of highly technical audiences.
Good. Thanks, Kate. Yeah. All right, Rahul, you want to try the same question?
The skills I use most often at my job probably would be just programming. I am a software engineer. So yeah, we code in Python mostly, but the programming language usually doesn't matter. At the end of the day, programming is just breaking down a problem into small steps and figuring out how to solve it. So that's something I learned at Furman, probably in not just my computer science classes, but my math classes as well, just like breaking down a problem and thinking through a problem completely, and not just at a very high level. What was the
Yeah. So what skills you wish you would have developed at Furman, and what skills did you develop at Furman that are useful in your job today?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there are other skills I have. I did develop at Furman, just like stats background. That I found extremely useful at my previous job, where I was doing online optimization, which is basically A/B testing, or that's just another way of saying randomized experiments on the Home Depot website. So that's certainly something I've used a lot. Reading technical papers, that's a skill I feel like I probably developed at Furman. Doing research and classes, and that's something that is constantly useful. You never know enough on a job. You're always reading white papers and other stuff. Yeah, what skills do I wish I had developed at Furman? Probably I wish I had spent more time thinking about my career at Furman. I sort of got out into the real world and sort of flailed around for a few years before I figured out what I actually wanted to do. But I don't feel like I can really blame Furman too much on that one.
Awesome. Okay, good. Thank you, Rahul. How about you, Patrick?
Almost talked without clicking mute there. Happens to me a lot. Skills I use most are programming skills. I also use Excel a lot for different ad hoc analysis that are needed there. Another one that I use a lot is a BI tool called MicroStrategy, where we connect it with Athena and AWS. Just backend, it's like loading data into a BI tool, and it has like different reporting metrics, and you can create different visualizations. with that. Another skill that I use a lot is presentation skills, whether that be within PowerPoint or just presenting out to upper level management or just stakeholders in general. And that is a skill I developed at Furman. I went through the business. I think they still do the business block. I hope they still do the business block, because even though it's really tough during it, you get so many great presentation skills, and you have the ability to drive all of this data and the insight and the researching that you did with your team into a more digestible format, whether that be a presentation or just talking it out in the paper that you write from there. So that's skills I developed at Furman, is much more of those soft skills, because I wasn't as technical as my colleagues here on the panel. I did develop those technical skills outside of Furman, so I did the master's at Wake Forest, and then the beauty of that is I had the foundation of programming from there that I then went on and taught myself more Python compared to what I learned in the program, which was R. For that, yeah. So the beauty of Furman is you really get these soft skills under your belt before you move on and move into the world, at least for my stint, and because I was less of the technical.
Thank you, Patrick. How about you, Connor?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to start with the most obvious and straightforward of those questions, and that is the skills that I use the most in my job role, and the ones that I learned at Furman have to be, I think, on the surface, the coding skills. The 2 semesters that we have to do as an applied math major for coding were largely the meat and potatoes carryover from my undergraduate. But I think part of what Furman gave me is also tackling unfamiliar problems, especially from a technical and largely technical and theoretical standpoint, was strongly ingrained in me. In my position, because the company is so small and the teams are smaller yet, working with massive companies, and we're expected to have the answers. We are the vendor, we have the contract. It largely falls on our shoulders to think quickly and efficiently on how to solve problems that the business doesn't have answers for, and oftentimes they are in unique situations. They want to do new things with their data, then they came to us because either other companies didn't have the answer, or they didn't have the people who are willing to tackle it if they didn't have the answer. And so I think both those things are things that Furman made me not afraid of, and that is to dive into large problems with technical skills to back. That said, I think that one of the tougher things that I think it took to start in immediately out of Furman in my undergraduate, and something that perhaps grad school could aid, is I think largely an in-depth experience with a professional subject matter. There obviously is not a professional track that I went down, and I'm not sure there was a professional track that would have teed me up for the position I'm in now. But I think walking into a project with only your wits to back you has its pros and its cons. So that's the only thing that I think I wish that I had considered more, is where am I going to end up? What can I do to prepare myself for situations before I end up in them? I don't know. I think that I've changed a lot as a person, and I've seen new cultures since leaving Tresata. A lot of professional skills, and obviously I'm in England now, and it's a whole different world. And so I'm not sure anything could have prepared me, but I think a little bit more thought there would have been, if I could tell my past self, what to look for. It's think about where you're going, look ahead and prepare, because no amount of preparation will be enough, but every bit of preparation will get you far.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Connor. So, as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, hoping the students in the room heard things like, you should be developing communication skills, you should be developing problem-solving skills, you should not be afraid when you encounter a problem that you don't know how to solve, right? and have to go through that process of figuring out how to solve it, maybe by breaking things down. I think that's all really, really cool information for those students. And I'll just point out that not a lot of people said, I needed regression analysis or I needed machine learning techniques, right? There wasn't any of that as part of those panel answers, right? So that, you know, to me, I really like the way they emphasized, although I'm interjecting here, right? I really like the way that everybody emphasized, you know, those skills that you normally don't think about, right? So in other words, don't be so focused on, I've got to get these certain things, but how do I develop the types of skills that I'm going to need in that job scenario? I think all of that is really, really good advice. So thank you all for those answers. Not that I prepped you for that, but I really appreciate it. So this is kind of a little bit of a related question. So what type of experiences should students target before graduation? So I guess I'm expanding on what Connor was just saying there just a little bit. So in other words, what experiences were impactful for you guys while you're here at Furman? What should students target as part of their experiences at Furman? And I'll turn it to Kate. I'll let you go first again.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. Thinking back to that last question, one thing just to kind of emphasize what Dr. Hutson was saying about, you know, very specific technical skills versus those more general communication and problem solving and thinking. I did very little coding in undergrad. I have a few very small experiences in like 1 or 2 classes and internship experiences. And I code every day in my job now. But it was those more like problem solving and kind of strategic thinking and being able to work independently and not be scared away by a hard problem that enabled me to learn to code on the job. So just to reiterate that. And then also when I think about experiences I would encourage you to pursue while in undergrad, I think when I look back at my trajectory through school and how I ended up where I am now and on this career path, I really think about very specific research and internship opportunities that I had that kind of pushed me and guided me towards where I needed to be. And for me, that looked like kind of entering college, having one idea and pursuing that and finding opportunities that would help me understand what that might look like. For me, that was medical school and observing in hospitals and doing summer internships in medical clinics and even research in a hospital, and like having those experiences that seemed exciting and maybe similar to a career track I would like to follow helped me see, okay, this part of this job is not actually something I'm interested in, but this quantitative health piece, I'm interested in that. How can I push into that a little bit more? And through like a series of very different research internship type opportunities, I was kind of got to wiggle my way, wind my way into this more specific field of global health and health-related quantitative research that I wouldn't have discovered through coursework alone. So my advice to you would be to follow your interests and your passions. And if there's something you're intrigued by or interested in, try and find an opportunity that might give you a deeper glimpse into what that looks like. And then figure out what you like about that experience, what you didn't like about that experience, and let that push you to the next thing and the next opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. Rahul, would you like to tackle the same question?
Yeah. So I think one thing I'd say is always been impactful is like taking things that are hard. And hard is not an objective thing. Hard is what do you find difficult. And that's really what makes you get better at it, is take something like that. So, you know, if you're taking a lot of introductory classes in something, as within this minor, like, you know, take a 400 level class of that in one of those subjects, or just, you know, really challenge yourself. You'll probably maybe find out if there's something there that interests you, and you'll certainly like get more than just a surface level knowledge of something. Other than that, you know, if you can do internships, obviously that helps prepare you for a job. But at the same time, I think research can also prepare you for a job, because a lot of these analytics jobs are pretty open-ended in the problem you're trying to solve, which is more research than a lot of what happens at typical internships. So that would be basically what I'd say would be impactful experiences.
Awesome. Good. Thank you, Rahul. Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I concur. Getting an internship all through undergrad, I didn't have an internship that was analytics sort of related. So I concurred. When I went into my master's, we sort of did work with more technical field, which I use now. Just to stack hands here with my fellow colleagues, I think something that could be really beneficial is taking on like almost a personal project of sorts, just to sort of get more of the analytics if you're going into the analytics under your belt, and something that can set you apart, especially within the interview. And data analytics is so open-ended, is if you have a project that you underwent that you're passionate about, you can speak about it in an interview very, very well. And as an interviewer, you can sort of see that this interviewee is really passionate about what they want to do in analytics. And I think just taking on a personal project can help just getting more tools into the toolbox for interviewing in the future. Because at the end of the day, it's important to have the experience, even if you didn't take an internship, to have something that is personal, and it just it's easier to learn in that way. Experiences that were impactful for me was an actual personal project. So when I was learning Python, I was like, oh, I like music. Let me jump into the Spotify API, even though I had no idea what any of that meant. But as you just sort of fail over and over and over again, you're going to learn, because there's so many great resources online for you to learn and make the most impact for yourself going forward there.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Connor?
I have to second Patrick's sentiment on the personal project. And so I won't repeat what he said. I keep a Raspberry Pi where I have taught myself Scala build tool and programming on the terminal on the command line, just as a way to keep myself sharp and experience things not through a professional point of view, but take things at my own pace. If I want to see how something works, in one fashion versus another, I have that opportunity. I don't have, necessarily a project or, a deadline looming over my head. And so it allows me to take my time and get a much more in-depth experience with a technical skill that perhaps I've been wanting to develop or didn't know I needed or could develop, or that there was even a use in developing. So reiterating what Patrick said. But I think part of that, what I was saying about the personal project, was a way for me to develop this technical expertise in things I perhaps never even knew about. But I think also it's a way of improving yourself. And I think that my time at Furman, the professors dropped hints on these things, and I was so pigeonholed not pigeonholed, just tunnel vision on getting to the end, figuring out the next steps after that. Once the degree's in hand, I got my piece of paper. And I think if you're in that situation, you're just like me, and that's going to be okay. But I think I have memories of Math 260, the higher transition to higher mathematics, and Dr. Harris whimsically said, math people, they have a bit of a math speak. And I think that was like the first little breadcrumb in this idea that like there is something to develop here. We're not doing this for no reason. And I think that was just barely a tap on the shoulder. After that, there was data structures and algorithms, and Brian Catron made a big emphasis on, we are here because part of it is learning how to code. Part of it is learning how to talk to people about code without actually coding, just being able to translate the layman's to the technical. And that's what he was doing as a professor to us. but he was also trying to go a step further and teach us we need to be able to translate the technical. And I think the hardest hitting breadcrumb, the whole loaf of bread that was dropped in front of my feet was early on in mathematical statistics. This is my end of my Furman career. I'm in, the big boy classes or big girl classes, the big person classes, and the Dr. Bauer gave us this paper, and the whole paper was just describing the need in today's workforce for quantitative literacy. And all the breadcrumbs were in front of me. And I don't think it quite hit me until I got out into the world and was like, wow, I'm really glad I know what I know, but I really wish I had picked up on what everybody was trying to tell me, and I probably could never have learned until I had this real world experience. And that is, be passionate about something. That passion will lead you to be good at something, and that will hopefully in the end lead you to have something fulfilling with your career. That's what I'm aiming for now. And I think that it's been a process all throughout Furman, all throughout my early professional career. And I'm hoping that I'm starting to pick up on where my life can take me.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all. All right. So Liz raising her hand. Do we have a question?
So we have a question from the online chat. Can they hear me? Can y'all hear me?
I can barely hear you.
I'll
I'm gonna translate
relay.
Kevin and help relay. So the question is, how much training did you get when you moved into your role? Many of them mentioned independent problem solving, creative thinking. Did it ever feel like you're being thrown in the deep end without clear direction?
Okay. So the question is, how much training did you get when you entered your role? And when you first got involved with the problem, did it feel like you were just being thrown into the world? So how much support did you have around you to help you in that? So we'll start with Kate.
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned before, I had very little coding or programming experience going into this role, and I entered a training program that was kind of a unique hybrid of working full-time, getting paid, but also pretty intentional training and coursework towards my master's in public health. And my cohort was 16 people, and it was about 50-50 between people who had experience coding and who did not. So we had a month-long boot camp where we were kind of given a lot of coursework and training on both coding and kind of subject matter type coursework and readings and experiences. And I feel incredibly grateful for that. Having people that like kind of all came from different starting points come together and be learning and in there together. And in a sense, in some ways, it did feel like being thrown into the deep end because it's a lot to learn and we were expected to learn it quickly. And then especially after that boot camp ended and they're like, okay, here's your team, here's your problem, here's a code base that we want you to start running and working through. It did feel overwhelming at times. But I think that problem solving and independent thinking that you've mentioned helped me contain those feelings of being overwhelmed. I think back to like some of Dr. Hutson's take-home tests that took like hours and hours and hours. But that feeling of like, okay, I do have, he's like, listen to this, they work. I do have some power in.
Rahul said you should take hard classes, right? And so
yeah.
That's my takeaway from the whole panel.
Exactly. Like having those experiences being like, okay, I've done things that felt overwhelming or impossible before and figured out the answer. And so that feels encouraging. And then also feeling like I did have, there are and will be structures in most workplaces. For example, we have code drop-in hours where you can drop in and bring your questions and more experienced coders will kind of help troubleshoot and debug, or there are online learning tools that you can use to kind of help understand a problem, teammates that you can go to questions. So there definitely is a network of support around you, but I think that, or around me in my role, and I think part of that is because it was really geared towards people with little experience and training us up quickly to be able to do good work. but also having that background and that foundation of knowing that I can do hard things and solve hard problems on my own.
Awesome. Cool. How about you, Rahul? Did you have support around you, or do you feel like you were thrown into the world?
A little of each. I think there was always someone assigned to me, and it was like, when you have questions, go to them. But it was never really a thing where they walk you through each and every step. It's like, okay, here's a problem. Come to me when you get stuck, and the expectation is, you don't get stuck on line one. So you do get thrown into the deep end, but there are people always to help out, or at least this was my experience, that there wasn't like a strictly formal training program. There were a couple of videos to watch, a few documents to read. Then most of it was just like, go in, start working on it.
Thanks. How about you, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, my department is brand new, so we were sort of thrown to the wolves from the get-go. But that's not necessarily a bad thing in respect to that, because like you learn from all of your mistakes, and my boss had my back and a lot of mistakes that I had. I actually made a big mistake as of recently, so I'm just trying to solve that right now and just going through some damage control this week. So it happens. It's not the end of the world. It's never the end of the world. And you will be better from it and make less mistakes in the future. Hopefully, that's what I'm telling myself right now. So training, not necessarily a lot of training in my role, but I think I'm such a different sort of, I guess, career than somebody else might get, because my team was brand new when I moved in as a data analyst. But it's not a bad thing if you're thrown to the wolves, because you'll come out of it a better person. That's what I'm telling myself there.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. I like the learn from failure. That's a good.
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
Good. How about you, Connor?
Yeah, a very similar situation, I think, to Kate, where there was a class of new hires come in. Most of them are all from liberal arts education, and some of them have coding experience, some of them did not. But we did have a training program for a few months. The company has proprietary software, and so there's not really any reason or expectation why we should know how to operate, inside the black box. So that's kind of necessitated by my company, my job. But then there is, outside the standard training, you're dropped into it, and it is, a little hard at first. I would say that I wasn't eased into it. I'm very fortunate that there was that transitory period with training. I would equate it more to getting into the pool, the first swim of spring. The steps, every step is just like, it's cold water you're stepping into, and it's a shock every step you go down, but then you get used to it, and then you take another step down. It has its discomforts, but eventually you're in the thick of it. So I still feel like I am encountering new challenges, but it gets a little bit easier each time.
Awesome. I'm going to try to leave a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes at the end of this for some more questions to come in. But I have one more question before we get to that. I've heard each of you talk about developing skills of how you approach a problem. So, and I know a lot of times when you're doing analytics work, you look at a problem and it's really difficult to even come up with the right question to be asking in order to get started with the problem. So can each of you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you come up with the right question to ask? Are the things that you do in your job where you're breaking problems down and trying to determine what the right question is to ask to move you forward in the job? In other words, how do you go about breaking that problem down into bite-sized pieces that you can manage? So maybe I'll start with Kate. Unless you don't want me to start with you, Kate, I can do reverse order if you'd rather. I know I just threw this question out, but I'll start with somebody.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think of the best example still. So if someone else wants to jump in and if they have something on top of mind, I'd be happy to defer.
I can go ahead and try to tackle it. Obviously, I'm not doing what I'm doing now with the problem or the question that you just asked. But normally when I get, so I work in like an agile framework so it's like 2 week, we sort of have what are called sprints, and you have to sort of tackle all the problems or projects or goals that you have for those 2 weeks. And if you don't, you have to bring them back up for the next week. So it's a really fast paced environment. But before I jump into any data whatsoever, I have a whiteboard over here, and there's a lot of stuff on the whiteboard. And really what I was before in undergraduate and I was almost said overgraduate in my master's program, I didn't really take enough time to really ruminate with the data and just sit in it and make sure that I understand the data and whatever needs to be asked or whatever needs to be solved with the data. So before I jump in, like I'm doing right now, with and sort of asking the right questions, is I whiteboard out what needs to happen and what our stakeholders want from us. And then from there, we can sort of create a question just through communication and just understanding the data more and more of what needs to be answered or what needs to be asked. And once you have that, what needs to be asked, it makes the whole process of just data analysis a lot easier rather than jumping in and asking the question when it's too late.
Thank you. Someone else want to jump in? Rahul?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say I am very much on board with that. It's just like, just get your hands dirty, just like get into the problem. It doesn't matter if you're making any headway towards solving it at first. I feel like this is something I really picked up at Furman doing research. Is like just start like start with a small case, and you can do a small case of any kind of data, any kind of problem. Just try to understand the first step. Try to make sure you understand the data. Take averages of the data if you're doing something. Just make sure you understand what's the range of the data. What does each column mean? What does each row mean? Just once you get your hands dirty, the problem becomes much less intimidating, and usually then your brain starts working in the background and start getting some avenues to go down.
Awesome, Connor.
Yeah, I think quite often I'm given problems in my work where, like I said, oftentimes I'm the vendor and I'm expected to have the answers, but that sound, as easy as that might sound, it's more difficult when somebody comes to you and says, here's something I want, but I don't know the questions to ask. It's I think quite intimidating to have to solve a problem when nobody's posed a problem. So that's kind of where my process starts, is I have to figure out what is the end state of whatever I'm trying to tackle. As a data engineer, a lot of times I'm trying to get data from one state, a raw state, to a finalized state. But when it's not made clear what that finalized state is, sometimes it just becomes, a decent amount of triage, of playing with, where could this data take me? And so I feel very fortunate to be on a small team of people who are willing to bounce ideas off of each other. So while everybody has their work stream, also working in an agile environment, like Patrick mentioned, and there's no time to lose on these things. So the moment that we're handed something, here's a bunch of raw data, can you just make it useful for us? It's very, very quickly to the drawing board. What is the finalized state? Would this be useful to you? Sometimes we bring it back. And so it becomes an iterative process of, can we agree on what is useful, what is not useful? Once we find a useful state, can we work backwards? Can we find how to take ourselves from a raw data standpoint, transform it, apply tracers, make sure case studies are being developed accurately, and data is being linked and visualized the way that it should. That is the stuff that I'm hired to do. And I'm also hired to make the data useful. But that's the part that they don't tell you, is there's a great deal of creativity that has to come in with finding that useful state.
Awesome, thank you, Connor. Kate, do you want to jump in on it?
Yeah, I think I thought of a good example that might be helpful. So the project I mentioned earlier, one of things I'm working on right now is looking at family planning and how access to different forms of contraception has changed over time, and what have been the biggest drivers in those changes. And so one of the data sets we're using to help answer this question is a very complicated, messy data set that is a series of surveys that they give every 5 or 10 years to experts in various countries. And there are about 60 different indicators. Different indicators are asked different years, asking questions about the family planning program. How well does your country do X? How do you think that your country is doing on Y and Z? And all these experts have to rank their country, and then they create aggregate scores on each of these indicators. And so the external partners that we're working with are really excited about this data. They're like, this is just a treasure trove of information of how these programs are doing and what has been changing over the years. These surveys have been going out since the 70s. We think this is going to be really important in understanding what have been the biggest drivers of changes from a programmatic side in family planning. Yet when I dive into the data, it's overwhelming. If you can imagine, there's 60 qualitative type questions that have some random kind of quantitative score that's based on people's opinions. There's not a clear time trend within or across countries. And it's hard to know, I can't throw 60 different indicators into a regression and just see what pops out. Like that's, from a mathematical statistical standpoint, that's not going to work, and that's not going to give us a clear answer. And so it really is kind of taking a combination of mathematical information and also subject matter expertise, and really like fine-tuning the question and what our goals are, to understand how we're going to be able to use this data to its maximum potential. And so for me, that looks like, at first, just like plotting out which indicators are available for which countries and years and trying to get a grasp of that. And then once I have a grasp of that, trying to understand, okay, how many data points do we need for this to even be worth pursuing? Like, is there some data we can eliminate just because we don't have enough information? And then it looks like trying to sort this data into buckets and mapping it into kind of a conceptual framework that others have developed that have a better understanding of family planning programs and what are the kind of different spheres of influence that might happen to make change in those spaces. And then it's taking my conceptual map and bringing that to someone who has been working in this research space for years and is kind of our in-house expert on family planning, and say, hey, how does this track with your understanding of the situation? What would you change? What would you adapt? And then it is going back to the drawing board and kind of creating new buckets and maybe looking at some correlation plots within those buckets, or doing some quantitative evaluation of how those data correlate with each other and with our outcomes of interest. And it's kind of just that like iterative combination of objective and more subjective information, and combining that in ways that help us get towards our ultimate question. Can say, if I'm not doing well and or people are having trouble access contraception, what are the levers I can pull? What are the changes I can make in the future that have worked for other countries? So really trying to figure out how we can use this messy information and data in service of that ultimate goal and question.
Awesome. Good. So if I'm going to recap that, I heard from Kate and Rahul, break the problem down into smaller cases, try some small examples, mess around with it. If I'm thinking of Patrick and Connor, it's draw it on the whiteboard, try to figure out the whole big picture here, start with the thing that you want to know at the end and kind of work backwards to fill out the question and those types of things. I think those are all good pieces of advice in terms of how you get started with problem solving, tackling something that maybe there's not even a really clearly defined question that you're trying to tackle. All right, so we got maybe 10-15 minutes left. Let me just open the floor for some questions from the audience. If you don't have any questions, I've got some pre-questions loaded here that I could ask, but maybe I'll take a few seconds to see if there's a question in the room or a question on the chat online for our panelists. Several people nodding, Kate, when you mentioned take-home tests. So Annie said, do you know of any people / jobs? Oh, I lost that one. There we go. Do you know of any people / jobs that combine sustainability with data analytics? That's probably not a question for me, but
I can jump in a little bit. I think data is kind of everywhere these days, and so any sort of field, like there, if you look hard enough, you're going to find people that have data that they want you to analyze. So I think that it's almost certain that there are going to be opportunities in that space. In my research institute, I know we have a team that looks at environmental health, and there's another team that's doing some analysis on climate change and climate science, which is kind of an interesting intersection with sustainability and data. In like kind of an academic research sphere, but don't know if anyone else has other ideas or responses to Anna's question.
I don't have a whole lot, but I will say that there is outstanding a large data question around sustainability and ESG, which is, kind of a big buzzword lately. And that's, environment, sustainability, and governance metrics. Data out there available to the public with regards to those three large umbrella terms is fairly scarce, but there are institutions out there that score businesses, large corporations, small corporations alike, on how sustainable their business model based on their environmental impact, how well they're governed, company culture, everything in there, almost in an auditory fashion, having to do with audits, not your ears. But that being said, there is a huge outstanding problem out there. And if there are people out there willing to tackle it, there are people out there willing to bring on teams to solve those problems. So if that's something that interests you, I would recommend you to chase it because there is potential out there.
Well, as a follow-up to that, do you guys know of any job descriptions or job titles that that person might look for when looking for jobs post-grad?
Yeah, I'm quickly looking up. I just did a Google search right now. But I know there's some to do what also could do. So like Gallo, we grow grapes for a business. So you can also look at like agricultural analytics. And I know a lot of what we play into is sustainable agricultural. So that could be another sort of keyword that you can put into this search. But no, I'm not necessarily aware of anything else besides just sustainability analyst on top. Sorry, Anna.
This isn't a specific answer to this question, but it is a generally good way of trying to do this is go on LinkedIn, go to a company that does things you're interested in, look at the people who work at that company, and look at what jobs they work on. Right, like look for a job title that might interest you, and then look at their previous roles, and that's a really good way of actually using LinkedIn. And then reach out to those people. It may seem weird, like reaching out to someone random on LinkedIn, but worst case scenario, they ghost you. You never knew them anyways.
So I got two more questions. Maybe we can try to answer these pretty quickly. Each of you, really quickly, how important is graduate school to employers?
In most of the roles I worked, they wanted a graduate degree, but that's not true of every role, but that's just the ones I've worked.
I would say, especially for my position at Tresata, I think one of the most important things is being able to think critically and making sure I wasn't muted. Think critically and tackle problems from, a fresh mindset. So there are actually a large number of people at the company, data engineers just like me, that came straight out of liberal arts institutions, out of state institutions, even from technical backgrounds. But it's that having that breadth of knowledge is what's important at my company. And I think that whatever you want to do, grad school can be great if there's a track that you really want to go down. If you want to specialize early, if you want to get familiar with all sorts of problems, there's nothing wrong with seeking entry-level jobs right out of your undergraduate.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I agree with Connor there. Like, I think graduate program sort of kickstarts your career in a way where like entry level you sort of have to go, or like right out of grad or undergrad you go entry level, and then from there. But there's not necessarily a huge difference comparatively speaking. From my experience, I think you're just with a graduate degree, you have more of the experience from undergrad in the critical thinking skills and more of the technical skills for me. And I wouldn't have been in my the shoes I am right now if I didn't take because I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do after graduation, and I took a analytics course with Dr. Grannon. Shout out to Dr. Grannon in Excel, and I loved it. And then I moved on and realized I wanted to go to graduate school. But I think graduate school is just a great way to kickstart your career. However, you can still get to where people are with a graduate degree just from an extra sort of year of work or 2 years of work.
Similar opinion, Kate?
Yeah, similar opinion. I think for me, it often affects. Sometimes there's just like a box you have to check to get to certain roles, or it affects the pay that you're able to get in certain roles. But my advice would be to make sure you're very, very confident in what you want to do before committing to money and time to a grad program. And there's nothing wrong with working for a little bit before starting grad school. In fact, I think you're going to get a lot more out of grad school if you have some work experience under your belt.
And
Right.
to add to that, there's an increasing number of online programs from like really reputable universities, and I'm actually in one right now. So, you can start working and then go back and get a master's without quitting your job.
My question just disappeared, but let me follow up with two more questions. First, how do you find, if you can answer this pretty quickly, how do you find a company that has the right environment for you? Right. So how do you, establish some sort of fit between you and the company? Can you talk about that for just a second?
I think I made it disappear because I typed an answer to it and I didn't know what that would happen. But just to summarize my answer that I typed really quickly, I think making a list of what you're looking for and what you value and having very specific goals in your job search. It can feel overwhelming coming out of undergrad, just being like, I need a job, anyone that will hire me. But really, you need to find something that's a good match for you and them. It's a two-way street. And asking very specific questions during the interview process to make sure that they align with what you're looking for. And then another piece is reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, like Rahul mentioned, and really asking questions about their experience. If they're not part of a direct hiring team, they may be able to be more honest with you about their experiences working for that company.
Anybody want to add to that? Anybody have anything different for that?
I was just going to say, I'd say one big thing is focus on who your hiring manager is. Hopefully, you're applying to a company with some idea that you want to work for. But, the hiring manager, the person you're going to work with every day, if they're a nightmare to work with, your job's going to suck. If they're easy and laid back, even if the company is kind of uptight about a lot of things, they can be more relaxed about things. So during the interview process, just like really try to get a feel for who they are and ask questions towards that.
I feel completely underqualified chiming in on this, but I will say when interviewing for any position, you're not only interviewing for the company, obviously you are, put your best foot forward, but always take note of who you're talking to, kind of like Rahul said, the hiring manager bit. Look for green flags in all your interviews. I didn't do a lot of interviewing, but I know that I felt fairly comfortable stepping into the situation that I did because the people that I were talking to throughout, 5 separate interviews, every single person had very good qualities about them and a lot of green flags.
I'll say another resource that you can use is just go onto their website and see like what different news or any articles that they mention on the website to see if the company's a good fit. And I can't stress enough, and I didn't do this a lot in undergraduate, is reach out to people on LinkedIn and have conversations with them. I know it's nerve-wracking and it sucks if you're ghosted. I was ghosted multiple times, but it is very much worth your while because not only is that you learning about the company. It's also a foot in the door of the company as well.
All right, let me ask once again, any last minute questions you want me to pose to the panel? Chris?
We encounter case interviews.
Did you encounter case interviews? What I'm assuming you mean by that is this, when you're candidates, they gave you a case and they had to explain how you would approach that case and things like that. Or does your company do that?
So are we discussing like a case study in the interview process?
Yeah, so maybe they gave you either during the interview or before the interview, gave you a case to consider to come in and talk about as, you know, how would you approach solving this type of problem?
From a high level, yes. It's definitely good to be on your toes and be ready to tackle problems from a high level. I think if there's anything more nitty gritty that you need to be aware of, a good company would let you know ahead of time.
Yeah, so when I interviewed at Home Depot, they actually gave me in advance 2 different projects to work on and present on during the interview. That was one of the 3 stages of the interview. Yeah, one of them was very much a statistical problem, like do some data analysis on this data set and tell us your conclusions. And then the other half was if you're doing an A/B testing, if you're trying to do A/B testing, is it better to use a Bayesian approach or a frequencies approach, or does it matter? So that certainly does happen in a lot of roles. Yeah, you can, but it's kind of nice because you can prepare for it. It's more like doing a class project than a nerve-wracking interview where you don't know what they're going to ask.
How much time did they give you, Rahul, before that?
I want to say probably a week.
I was given a written test, and then also, and that's something that we do for all of our hires at our company, I believe, and also did have to answer some like kind of specific problem-solving questions live during the interview. But it was kind of a way to just kind of see how you think on your feet, and it wasn't anything too technical, but more like trying to see what your problem-solving skills were and how you kind of were able to communicate clearly and effectively, maybe under a little pressure. But I think they've taken some of those more high-pressure situations out of the equation because they realize that's not always the fairest way to evaluate people.
About you, Patrick, did you have any tests?
I did not. Fortunately, I did not. I know it really depends on what role you're going for. Like I have a buddy who's interviewing right now for a really, really data intensive role that he had a week-long sort of project that he had to do. I know no consulting agencies, they are big on case interviews. So if you want to apply to whether it be the Big Four or other consultants, make sure you brush up on some case mock case interviews. But that was not for me. Because I'm not very good at case interviews. But just expect if it's a technical role, you should probably get more of a technical sort of case, but you will have time to do that case.
Well, it's 7:06 and we promised to be done by 7. I think Connor probably might want to go to sleep. I don't know. Kristen, did you want to make an announcement before you can come in front of the camera?
No, move it down a little bit. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for participating tonight. I just want you to know we're going to send up a follow-up message to tonight with some opportunities for both internships and full-time employment opportunities with some of these organizations, as well as others that our offices are aware of. We'll also send you information about a virtual career fair that's coming up next week. We have a group of companies who are interested in talking to Furman students about some internship and full-time opportunities. So I encourage you to go on a Handshake and check that out and make sure you have your profiles up to date with your majors and GPAs if you participate in that. So we'll send some more follow-up information and connections to these wonderful panelists as well. So hopefully take their advice and follow up with them afterwards on LinkedIn and get some more information. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Hutson, for moderating
You're welcome.
tonight.
So for those of you that are sitting in the physical room with us, we're going to stick around a little bit. If you have some questions about data analytics or research and internships or those types of things, please stick around and ask us questions. We'd be happy to talk to you about that. But if everybody would you please give another round of applause to our panelists. Very much appreciate you spending time with us. I think it was great information that you guys relayed. I'm like super in awe that you guys are all in really good jobs, doing great things. I think it's a testament to your hard work, but also the training you got here. And so hopefully you'll stay in touch with us. We'll be happy to help you out in any career ways we can, or just to keep the conversation about what sort of future careers can our data analytics graduates try to pursue. We'd love to continue the conversation. So thank you once again. And with that, I think I will close at least the online portion of the panel. So thanks again, everybody.